So my name's Adam Mullett. Like Kieran said in the introduction, I'm a product owner at IBM Garage. Thank you very much. And this whole talk is about questions. And I would love if everyone could pull out their notepad or their keyboard or wherever they're going to do it so that they can write down questions that they've got to ask. You're welcome to stop me and ask them whenever you like. Or we're also going to have time at the end to answer questions as well. Plus, I've got a giveaway for you, which I'd love actually for you to interact with. So it's going to be something that's already valuable off the shelf. But if you've got something to add to it, and I'll show you how to do that at the end, that would also be really cool. So this talk is more questions than answers, because I'm not going to tell you how to be the best product owner ever. But what I am going to do is hopefully arm you with some of the questions that I use and give you a little bit of an insight into the way that I think and the way that I approach product when I'm building it. So questions, they're really powerful. Now, just to let you know how I'm going to take you through these slides, there's a red sentence on each of the slides, and it's definitely the most important information. So if you walk away with 6 sentences out of the next 25 minutes, these are what I want you to remember. And so I'm going to actually read them out and explain them. And then there's loads of other information I'm going to give you, including a few questions, which you can take away as well. Okay, so leading with questions helps you get to a right answer, no matter what you're building. I think one of the most exciting things about being a product owner and being a product manager is that you can take the skills that you're learning here and in this job and apply them in any industry. You can apply them to almost any problem, and it can be in any business type, whether that's in government, whether that's in startup, whether that's in enterprise. You have the ability to take the skills you learn out of enterprise design thinking, of delivering solutions or software and whatever you're doing, and apply it to anything. And one of the key techniques that we use to do that are questions, right? It helps you to get to a right answer. And I say that because I've always been surprised when I'm working with teams, no matter what I thought the solution was when I walked into that, you always end up with something that's a little bit different and a little bit better, right? Because all of us are smarter than any of us. So I've asked loads of questions in my career. I'll just give you a little bit of a background about me. So I've been a journalist. For my sins, I was a marketer. So I was a journalist for about 5 years, spent a lot of time working on, politics and finance reporting. Spent a lot of time talking about the financial crisis of 2008 and 9. That was super exciting. Then I went into marketing, mostly B2B marketing, and heavily into marketing automation, a little bit of B2C marketing. And then an interesting sidestep, I was a sales team leader for a software as a service product, which is, you would know, it's called Google Maps. I also worked in product, been doing that for a few years now. Currently, I'm working as a consultant, and then obviously as a coach, right? So I coach my team, I coach my clients, and I coach people as I'm working and teaching as well, right? So in all of these roles, you ask loads of questions. There are different types of questions, though, that you ask. So for example, in journalism, you ask a whole plethora of types of questions, but the main ones are gathering information and confirming information, particularly if you're working in hard news. If you're working in some sort of, investigative journalism, you might be looking at questions as a way of catching people out. As a marketer, you're always trying to ask questions to work out whether or not you understand your customers or your clients or your members really well. And you want to know what they think about you as well. So those are sort of seeking to understand questions. When you're in sales, and this is a really useful technique for product owners, you use questions actually to influence people, right? So hot tip, people believe their own thoughts more than they believe yours, right? So if you can use questions to lead them to a place that they have brought themselves to on their own, they will believe that more readily than if you tell them the same thing. And it's a key influencing technique that you can use with questions. And the same in product as well. I also ask loads of questions when I write my book. So my book's about, essentially how an individual can lead change in an organization. I won't talk about it too much there, other than that a number of the chapters in the book relate very, very closely to what I'm talking about now, including like the key one, which is about curiosity and how that can actually change an organization. But I will tell you a different story first. So I'm going to tell you one story and different aspects of it as I go through some of these slides. And it's from when I was working in an insurance company, and we were delivering an enterprise marketing automation suite. So this was multi-channel. It was everything from your social media management through to your CRM, connected to your website, your app, to actions that came out of phone calls from people, branch interactions, and website, of course, email marketing, SMS, and so on. So it was pretty much the whole kit and caboodle of, what is in enterprise marketing automation. And, that goes from anything from as simple as creating automated tasks all the way through to, working out whether or not we can store someone's data, in line with GDPR principles, in line with the company's privacy, depending on which country the data would be stored on. So, it was a really involved and interesting thing to be involved, to be the head of. And so the story I want to tell you is about our social media automation tool. And the reason I want to talk about that is because it's really easy to understand, but it's also a really good story to tell, which explains what I'm going to show you. Okay, so I'm going to show you 5 practices. The first one is about what I call structured empathy. So deliberately designing feedback loops with your users, you can insert the word customers as well there if you like, into your work would lead to a better product design and adoption. So I had the interesting experience of being in this team that was developing this large multi-touch marketing automation platform. But my previous role in that organization was actually in the team that ran the social media for both the frontline and for the marketing teams, right? And so I was the owner of that. And so when I came into this transformation program where we were delivering this new technology, they said, all right, cool. Who's the most knowledgeable person in the business who can tell us all the requirements? And I said, well, me. And they said, no, we can't ask you because you're in the team. We need to get someone else. So we had to actually then start asking the people who had replaced me and work with them to understand their requirements, knowing that they hadn't actually determined them in some cases. However, what we found is that by working with them in a structured way, by asking them loads of questions, we actually came to a really good understanding. What was also cool was that we were unifying the experiences of the marketing team. So the 2 teams in marketing, 1 team in the corporate relations, and then 1 in the front line. And we were unifying all their experiences, right? Which we hadn't done before. And so by taking a unified approach and by taking a structured approach to understanding their needs, we were actually able to get to the right level of requirements, which obviously gave us the right solution in the end. So, questions that I would ask, and again, this is all about questions. And these questions, by the way, I will give you in the takeaway at the end. Feel free to write them down if you like, which will help you remember them, but they'll also be that takeaway. So questions we were asking ourselves were, what would tell you that you've talked to enough users? And going beyond my safe space within the marketing team was something that I had to do, right? We had to actually expand the net of stakeholders quite wide, and that got us to a much better place. And how do you plan to include users in the design of your product? Again, by doing this and being conscious about it, we got to a much better place. The solution was much more robust. It had a lower reliance on personal expertise. So there were fewer single person dependencies. And in the end, people really loved what we'd done for them. Okay, so the next practice is leading with a disciplined action, right? And when I say disciplined, I don't mean bringing out the cane. I mean being disciplined like a monk and being able to stick to the plan, know what's important, and follow through on those things. So I firmly believe that we get disciplined and then we get successful. It's not the other way around. So it's be, do, have. It's not the opposite of when I have $1 million, I will be rich and therefore I will be good with my money. You have to turn it around and say, I am good with money and therefore I have what I need and have what I'm seeking. So some of the example questions that you would ask here, and this is particularly interesting and useful when you're using a methodology like Scrum or something similar. It doesn't have to be Scrum. You could be doing some sort of structured process with Kanban as well. You want to be asking yourself, how do we know we are done? I ask myself this question again and again and again at all sorts of different resolutions, you know, whether it's at the unit of work for a user story, is it at a release level? Is it something else, right? So how do we know we're done? And it allows us to think and break down the work in a structured way that we know that's actually going to get processed really well. Another one that I ask myself all the time is, what and who do I need to say no to right now to do what needs to be done? So this is a prioritization question, and it's something you should constantly be asking yourself. And then, you know, there's other questions around that you'd ask yourself about retros, you know, how can we be more sustainable? All right, back to my story about the social media management tool. So like I said, I'm telling the story because it is relatively easy to understand, right? So so everyone's used social media, everyone thinks they understand how it works. Obviously, social media marketing automation is a relatively niche thing, right? So we're talking about capabilities like someone visits your page, they message you with a certain phrase, and it creates a task in the CRM for that person to be contacted later. You know, so there's lots of connections in and out of different systems. And this is what we were trying to do. So before I tell my story, as the product person, you own the narrative and have the privilege and responsibility to tell a great story about your team's work. So what I was doing, we're at Big Room Planning in this transformation program. We had quarterly Big Room Planning, and part of that was our showcase. And the awesome thing about doing a really big showcase is that the right sorts of people were coming along to that showcase. And so, I could see hundreds of people in the room. I could also see in the front line a lot of the people that I needed to influence, the CEO, the head of our division, other people that really needed to know what we're talking about. And by telling the story about what I had done, which was the day in the life of, like a user journey for someone who was, you might also know it as a service blueprint, right? So from both the user and the staff perspective, what would happen at each stage of that person's interaction? And in doing so, I was able to tell the story and show how there was a unified interaction for the user and for the staff member, which had never happened before, and people could see why it mattered. Because before then, right, social media management, yeah, who cares, right? It's just Facebook. Well, no, it's not. It's a lot more than that. Now it's a service channel. Now it's the ability to contextualize communications with them and actually tell them what they really need to know. So, we were asking ourselves in the team, who are the decision makers? So the customers and users, right? It's not just people who are going to be in the team. They sort of got it intuitively, but it was all the other people around the business. And obviously for things like social media, it's high risk activity, right? Because it's immediately public. And there's a lot of sort of like attack area or attack surface, right? Where there's hundreds of different interactions. There's loads of different ways things can go wrong, right? And making sure that everyone's understanding how this works. Where am I telling my story? Where else could I be telling it? Again, I wasn't sure if I should waste what was going in my head. Should I waste my time on stage talking about something that is essentially 1/20th of all the work we've done? But it gave me a great story. It gave me a unifying narrative, something that people could walk away from and actually tell again in a different room. And that's why it became powerful. And people were able to give me feedback. People were actually able to interact with me on that because of something that they understood. All right. Practice number 4, co-planning. That's a word I made up. Including everyone who needs to help deliver the plan. When you make the plan, it leads to the most predictable results, right? So I think it was Roosevelt who said, plans are useless, planning is invaluable. And this is what this is about, right? So you can sit down and make a plan. If you haven't consulted everyone else who needs to know about it, especially the people who are delivering it or anyone who you're dependent on, it's not going to really help you get to where you need to go. And predictability is the entire purpose of planning, right? So including everyone who is in your team, who are in your stakeholder network, in your plan, whether or not that's just showing it to them before it's finalized, whether or not it's creating it together, super, super important. So some of the questions that I ask myself is, how often should you be revising your plan, right? So it's a little bit like when you go orienteering. I don't know if anyone's ever done that in the bush, and you've got your map and you've got your compass. This is probably a bit old fashioned now, given that every phone's got a GPS and Google Maps, but there's a sport where you look at a map and you have a look and you set off in a direction based on a compass. And if you just look at the map and check your direction once, you're not going to really get there, because you're going to be very, very inaccurate. You have to constantly revise. The question is how often, right? So if you've got a really good and clear milestone far off and you know how you're going to get there, you probably don't need to revise too often. If it's complicated, if there's lots of uncertainty, and you tell me about a product that you've developed where there's not uncertainty, it doesn't exist, you need to be revising your plan relatively often. The question is how often, and then that's something you will have to work out on your own, but this is a question that can help you get there. How have you involved the team in the planning, right? You should always over-index and over-communicate what you're doing, and make sure, and going back to the structured empathy, making sure that you're including people in that process. And then finally, the one I'll talk to at the end, what are your biggest planning assumptions and how could you de-risk them, right? So these are things that you want to pull out, and it's things you want to agree and actually incorporate that into your plan, so you have predictability. All right, back to my story around social media. So it was fantastic. I'd been up there on stage. They had a story that they could take away, easy peasy, job done. Now they're all coming out of the woodwork. I had people who were users. Fantastic. They couldn't believe it. They've been waiting this for years. Great. Very impatient. Good sort of problem to have, right? Product owner has users who would like to use their product. Easy. But then I had their bosses, and then I had bosses who didn't know that they were responsible for this. They were worried. They were worried because suddenly they were like, oh, am I going to be involved in an escalation? Is my team trained? Do I know what I need to know? How does this technology work? All these sorts of things. And then, of course, there were also confused people. So people who, now that we had united all these different parts of the business together, and that they were all going to be interacting with one single tool, and you could see each other's data and plans and so on, they're like, okay, yeah, that's all good, but I didn't do anything before. Why do I have to work now? And obviously there were good reasons for that, but they were confused, right? So being radically transparent helped them come on the journey, right? And being open with your plans, progress, your vision, and your priorities, it garners supporters, and it allows you to elicit valuable feedback. So by having all these people involved, we were able to have questions that we would never thought of. Like, for example, how will we have to change the way that we pay our staff if they have to answer social media queries on the weekend at night? Oh, okay, we hadn't thought about that. The award didn't cover that. So that by being radically transparent well in advance, they were actually able to interact, right? And the questions I ask is, when I'm presenting these plans and, co-planning, being radically transparent, I publish it, I show it, everything's open. My working document is the published document, right? Unvarnished, and it's the latest that we've got at all times. But I always think about myself when I'm designing that document, what are people most interested in about what I'm doing? So is it dates? Is it key functionality? Is it key risks? How can I show more information in order to receive better feedback? And then finally, one of my favorite ones, what sorts of information can I justify not publishing, right? So there's always something that you might not want to show because it's inconvenient. Maybe it's too hard to explain. You want that to be the exception. You want to be open by default and have people come to you and engage you where they want to. All right, so that's my 5 practices. I'd actually like you to help me, right? So what I'm about to show you is the thing that I'm going to be giving away. And essentially, this can be downloadable as a PDF, but it is actually a Google Sheet. And it's got all the questions that I've got from here. And the idea is that over time, why did I make it a Google Sheet? First of all, it's open. Secondly, it links up with Google Forms. And what I'd love you to do, either now or anytime after now, is to actually go here and submit questions. So probably as I've been talking, you might have thought, what sort of questions do I ask? Or he missed this one, or I don't understand that. This is a great opportunity for you to actually submit that and put it on the list, so we can almost crowdsource this and get it all going together. So in this form, and you would fill this out one per question. What questions do you ask? Who would you aim it at? When would you use it? What area of product management does it help you with? And in this case, if you don't know, just leave it blank. But, when I'm saying what area of product management, it could be design, it could be strategy, it could be vision, whatever. And if you wanted to be credited, write your name here. And just as an example, we got all the ones that I've done, but actually I've already had one submitted, which is fantastic. So thank you, Thomas Freiberg. His was about product design. And his awesome question was, what has to be true for this product to create value for its users? And what he actually proposes is that you can use this for yourself, your squad, and with users themselves, right? And you use that when you're designing a product or testing with users. So I think that is an awesome question. So thank you again, Thomas. I'm just going to show you where you can actually get that. You know what? I'm going to make it easy for you. Let's go crazy and put it in the chat. Okay, so there's the sheet. So sheet above and form to submit questions. I hope you can see that in the chat. Okay, so in a moment, I'm going to ask you to actually interact with me and ask me questions. So you can either do that by unmuting yourself or by typing them in the chat. But before we do that, very quickly, what I'm going to do is just encourage you to connect with me. So that even though I've sent you the link here in the chat in Zoom, particularly those who are watching this in a recording, if you connect with me on my LinkedIn, and you can see the URL, it's linkedin.com/in/Adam-Mullett, 2 L's, 2 T's. You'll be able to get to my profile. And then the screenshot that's just above there is actually a link to the same document. You'll also see information on there about my book. If you want to buy that, that would be awesome. So I published that last year. I've had awesome feedback about how useful it is, and it makes me feel warm and fuzzy. So if you want to buy that, that would be great. There's more information about that also on my LinkedIn. All right, so now I would love to take some questions.
Adam, could we just ask that people raise their hand if possible in order to ask a question, just so that everyone's not asking a question at the same time, I suppose. Is that okay?
Okay, and then you want me to basically call them out from the user list?
To unmute themselves, yes.
All right, cool. Does everyone know how to raise their hands? So I think that's under reaction. Yeah, so if you go to the bottom of your Zoom screen and you press on reaction, there's a button called raise hand, which I'm doing now. Cool. Maybe I was muted the whole time. There was no one raising their hand. Someone in the chat, Alexandra wrote, love be, do, have model, and also agile tools. Absolutely. Come on, guys, who's got a question for me? Simeon, you must have one. Oh, hold on, here we go. Julian Morris, go ahead.
Hello, it's not quite Julian Morris, it's Adam Morris.
Oh, hello.
It might have been left over from my previous parent-teacher interview where we had to put our child's name in, so I apologise for that. Adam, if you had some challenging conversations with particularly difficult stakeholders, what kind of questions would you ask? How would you kind of lead them to kind of influence an outcome?
Yeah, okay, really good question. So I have dealt with difficult stakeholders in the past. And they could have been difficult for a number of reasons, maybe because they felt threatened, maybe because they didn't understand, maybe because they just simply didn't like what I was doing. But when they were being challenging, when they were being challenging to me, my challenge, so my opportunity was to understand them better, right? And so I would always ask, so what are you trying to do? And I'd be asking around, why are you doing that? And almost doing the 5 whys method and trying to understand what their objectives are and if they have any, if they see any risks. So basically try to understand their position. And usually, not always, but usually that is enough to make them feel like they're heard. Because if you think about it, what they're worried about is some sort of risk to themselves, or they're afraid. And by engaging that conversation, you can usually help them feel included, help them feel heard, and obviously you'll be getting better feedback from them as well, which you can incorporate into your next plan.
Great. Thank you very much.
No worries. Thanks for asking the question. I've got one from Marina.
Hello, Adam. I found a couple of questions from the community. They had to submit questions when they RSVP. So there is one there. What questions to ask to determine value in a feature when prioritizing work to be done? Any tips on that?
Yeah, okay. So how do you determine, basically, what questions do you ask to determine the value of a feature? Okay, so this is something near and dear to our heart for those of us who work in IBM Garage. It's actually a key part of our methodology, but I'll give you the generic answer. Basically, you need to understand what drives value, right? The first thing is you'd be asking questions of the business. Let's take a simple example. Say that you're selling some widget, right? So you use the ultra generic example. You're selling widgets, and you want to find out, which is the most valuable and which one should I be selling? Because sometimes you might be selling something and actually losing money. Sometimes you might be selling, 200 of this, and you're like, woohoo! Actually, we didn't get anywhere with that, but this one was more valuable. So finding out what drives value is the first thing, and then finding out, so let's just say you were selling widgets and you were dealing with the website owner who was responsible for having that sales conversion. You'd be asking them, which parts of their sales funnel, which of the steps in that process are the most challenging. So where do you get your drop-off rate? I'll give you an example. Going back to the insurer, one of the product teams that I led, we redeveloped the sales funnel to be a recommendation tool, a user-led recommendation tool, right? So insurance is really complicated. There's loads of questions you have to ask people. We turned it into a 5-click, 2-minute process that was based on questions again, which basically asked about the team's, the prospect's life situation, right? To give them the right recommendation. Now, we knew where to focus on that. We knew which feature within that sales funnel to focus on, because we had analyzed the pipeline in this case, and we saw that a lot of people would reach our page where they had product information, and then we would see them added to the cart, and then we'd see a huge drop off. And at that point, we knew, okay, there's a problem here. And doing some user research, we're actually able to understand why that was happening. And when we could say why it was happening, we could then also think about, well, how are we going to remedy that? And once we'd gotten to that point, we could then actually start to put dollar figures on and make predictions about how much better our sales journey would have been compared to the old one, right? So we think about, like we were getting when we actually launched it, it was actually much more successful than we originally thought, which is awesome. It was actually, for one metric, it was 3 times better than before. And that had a dollar figure attributed to it in our sales funnel, because we knew exactly how many people, well, the average cost of sale was, we knew what our cost per acquisition was, we knew what our throughput was, and at every stage of that funnel. And so being able to know that and measure that and show that we had a step change improvement then gave us that value. Now, that's obviously looking back, but we also had the ability to predict that as well. And that allowed us to say, that's the feature we're focusing on first. So that was a bit of a complicated answer, but it was all about, so that was more the journey that we took, but all along the way, there was questions about, like I said, understanding value, what drives it, understanding what our users want, understanding what the website owner wanted, and so on. Cool. I've got a Fraser M's, the hand up.
Hi there, Adam. I was just wondering, this is probably inherently linked to the last question that Marina asked as well, but I was wondering if there's any specific questions you would ask in regards to how to define your MVP.
Yep, absolutely. So MVP is a super overused term, and in many circles it's misunderstood. And the answer I'm going to give you, there'll be someone probably on this call who will tell me or tell you that I misunderstood it. The point is, if we go back to the original words of minimum, so the smallest or the least that we can do, viable, so viable means it has to work, and product, so it's a product, something that's been produced. And the question I always ask, so I like to get into subtractive thinking in the sense of, you know, what can I get away with that is here or that in our plan that we don't need for MVP? I'll give you an example. Let's just say you wanted to go pick up golf balls on the golf golf course, not on the driving range, but just, you know, zooming around. You might ask yourself, do I need seatbelts? Seatbelts are hard to design. They're expensive. You know, they have to be crash tested. Well, do we even need them? No, let's just remove them. So what can we do without? Same with the windscreen. Do we need a windscreen? That's another part that needs to be designed and put in. It can break and needs servicing and so on. So always think about what can I do without? And to get to that point, you really need to understand what are the really, really key requirements. So when I say key requirements, you want to be getting down to, you want to be focusing on a key user, like a single person, ideally, and you should have almost like a persona, like a picture, even like a picture of a real person would be ideal, and put them on the wall. Have some of their quotes around, you know, what are the things they care about, and say to yourself, what is the one thing that they care about that I can make a difference with? And that's what you should start with. And anything else that's superfluous, that doesn't need to be delivered with that, I would recommend you wait. Because what's the point of MVP? The point of the MVP is to learn. It is to obviously to deliver quickly, but it is to learn, right? So we don't want to overinvest and have waste. We want to get it in front of people. We want to go back to that user who told us they needed this thing. Hey, buddy, here's the thing I built for you. Does it work? Yes, fantastic. Awesome, use it. And then what's the next thing you'd like to see on that? And then that becomes your second release or second iteration. So the answer to your question is, what can I do without, or what doesn't need to be here? All right, any other ones? We'll just look at the chat. I see one says, thank you, Fraser. Has anyone had a chance to actually interact with the links that I sent? Have a look at the downloadable, or maybe even submit a question? No, obviously you got your camera on there, Simeon. Is this the yank me off stage part, or you got a question?
No, I'm ready to yank you off stage when you're ready, Adam.
Cool. Well, let's have one more question, and then we'll call it. Who's brave? Who's curious? Either or will do. All right. I see Marina's got another one. Go on, Marina.
I was trying to give everyone a chance to ask before I get my second one, but this came from the community as well. So obviously the questions are very helpful, but before getting the opportunity to ask the questions, when you're dealing with stakeholders or in a client scenario, how do you convince them that validation is key?
Validation of what?
Validation of your concept or your idea, of a product idea or a concept.
As in, why should we take the time to test whether it's a good idea before we build it?
Yeah.
Oh, well.
How do you convince people?
Yeah, I think that was my question. Oh, I'm talking without my hand up, but
go ahead, Deanne.
Sim's going to kill me.
Go ahead, Dee.
Yeah, so I guess it's from the background of having to convince clients that validation is not optional. So from a consultancy perspective, like that is, I would say, almost impossible still. So
Dan, let me understand. You're working in a consultancy, someone has hired you and they say, build me this thing. And then you're like, hey, should we check if it actually works?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I think some people, probably depends how deep their pockets are, right? Like if they don't care if it doesn't work, then they don't need to go ahead and actually try it, right? But in terms of, let me think about this in terms of a question, you know, like you don't want to be facetious and say, do you care if you waste money? But basically what you want to do is spend the time up front, and this is probably to be done, you know, with whoever's actually sold the deal, who's actually got them in as a client of yours. You want to be thinking about, you know, when you're actually doing your solution design, or when you're at the point where you're pricing your engagement with them, you want to be thinking about what's your delivery method. And so saying, oh, we're going to use an agile delivery, and they're like, yeah, it would be, yeah, agile's fast, right? Well, hold on, it might not be faster, but it will allow us to be more adaptable, and it will allow us to have, you know, less waste, and hopefully higher adoption at the end if we do it right. So I would start there. And if you've already got a client who, and look, sometimes this is a great thing, right? So if you've already got a client who really knows what they want, and they've been waiting for this, and they just want you to build it, sometimes that's okay, right? Because it's their company, it's what they want, and you're going to do as best a job as possible to make it work. Now, obviously, you also want the follow-up work, so you don't want to have it crash and burn and then they blame it on you. But many times I've seen it that really clever clients will ask a consultant or an external person to say what they've been saying for a long time, because it allows them to influence people higher up in their organization. And sometimes that's the whole reason you were hired, and that's okay, right? So I guess my answer to your question is start early and make sure that they understand what that this is a non-negotiable part of your delivery. And the reason it's non-negotiable is because your aim is to make them successful. So we're outcomes based when we work in Agile. But if you're already in there and you're working with someone who's really locked into their solution idea, what I would be trying to do is run small experiments. So if you're already there and they've got a scope of work and it's locked in and you've arrived and they're like, bad luck, just do it. Your opportunity is to run a small experiment. Now you'd be asking yourself, how can I validate one of my assumptions? So identify your risky assumptions early. And then how can I validate them quickly? Is it a conversation? Is it a quick form? Is it a wireframe? Is it a walkthrough with a group of users? And that would allow you to actually validate that hypothesis, or to, you know, test that assumption really, really quickly. And I would say you'd have to be a bit strange to say this experiment failed, but we're still going to pursue it anyway, right? So using that as an influencing tool may be what I would propose. So that was a bit of a long-winded answer, but hope that sort of answered it.
Thank you.